Kristaps Porzingis is by far and away one of the most fascinating young players in the NBA today. Nicknamed the Unicorn, he embodies the idea of a mythical creature that shouldn't possibly exist, but in this case, he does. Standing at 7 foot and 3 inches tall with incredibly long arms, Porzingis has always been an athletic monster, but his shooting touch, quickness, ability to post up and handle the ball separate him from other giants of the past. And he's exploded into form following the departure of Carmelo Anthony, leading the Knicks to a record of 17-14 and looking more likely to make the playoffs than in any of the past 3 seasons. He is doing all of this while dropping 25 points a night and protecting the rim better than most other NBA big men. Leading the Knicks is a tough task, and KP is doing it at the young age of 22, which got me thinking, if he stays at the Knicks for his entire career, or even just a long period, could the Unicorn become the greatest New York Knick of all time? This video will examine that question by taking a look at Porzingis' career to date, his skill set and potential, before looking at the past achievements of some of the best New York Knicks of all time, and what KP would have to do in order to overtake them. Kristaps Porzingis was born in Latvia, and lived there for the majority of his youth as he grew up in an incredibly basketball-centric family. His parents had played basketball, as well as both of his brothers, one of whom played professionally in Europe when Kristaps was just a young teenager. His brother would take him to some of the off-season training camps, and Porzingis would get an early look into just what is required to become a professional basketball player. He would put in the hard work as a result, and bring his skills up enough to draw interest from the professional Spanish club, Sevilla. He would join their youth team at age 15, and despite not speaking the language and struggling initially to adjust, it might have been the best thing to ever happen to Porzingis. The nutritionist for the club diagnosed Kristaps with anemia, a disease which reduces your blood cell count, something which would limit his aerobic capacity and ability to train and play to his maximum potential. But luckily, due to catching it at an early age, the club and Porzingis were able to treat it, and he has since been able to increase his red blood cell count to a regular level. In 2012, Kristaps would make his debut for the senior side of Sevilla and wouldn't look back. While he initially got limited minutes and opportunities, the experience of playing against fully grown men and professionals was and is invaluable. In the 2014-2015 season, Kristaps would blossom on both ends of the court and become a much more consistent player, and was subsequently awarded the Eurocup Rising Star Award, being the youngest player to ever win it. After this season, he would declare for the 2015 NBA Draft, one which featured D'Angelo Russell, Karl Anthony Towns, and Jahlil Okafor. Porzingis was seen as a bit of a wild card in the draft, as he possessed great skills and athleticism, but many worried about his skinny frame and past experiences with tall, shooting big men from Europe. This bias against tall European players was amazingly summed up by Adrian Wojnarowski when he said that Porzingis has an innate awareness about the way the American public sees a long, young European teenager. He comes to the NBA with a full understanding that popular basketball culture declares him guilty until proven innocent of the basketball crimes of Darko Milicic and Nicholas Chavetsky and Andrea Bargnani. He's considered a stiff, a bust, a blown lottery pick until he doesn't become one. I simply love this expression from Woj. When fans draft a young American player, the majority are instantly filled with hope of what could be. But when a European is drafted, often the majority of fans are instilled with fear, worrying about all the things that could go wrong instead of right. But Porzingis would take no time to prove that he wasn't going to be a bust. In his first game with the Knicks, he dropped 16 points in a win. And then in November, he would drop 24 points, grab 14 rebounds, and swat 7 shots in a win against the Houston Rockets. He was the first 20-year-old player to have that stat line since Shaquille O'Neal himself. And anyone who had been worried about Phil Jackson picking the young Latvian was worried no more. The hope of the New York Knicks had arrived, and he was magical. Kristaps ended the season averaging 14.3 points and 7.3 rebounds per game, and most impressively, he averaged 2 blocks a game as well. Many had worried that the tall, lanky Latvian would struggle to defend against the monster big men in the NBA, but KP has proven that he could hang with the giants and use his incredible reach and verticality to wall off the rim for most players and frustrate them by recovering and blocking shots that most NBA players would only dream of swatting. KP would take another leap in his second year and averaged 18 points a game with the same number of rebounds and blocks, but his scoring was limited by the presence of Carmelo Anthony, who was hanging on to his last days of being the man and number one option in New York. From the first season of KP with the Knicks till now, it became apparent that at some point, the reins to the city of New York would be handed to the Unicorn. It was just a matter of when and not if. The when arrived in this past off-season when the Knicks traded Carmelo Anthony for Doug McDermott and Enes Kanter. And whilst the trade appeared to be very lopsided, it allowed the Knicks to move on from the Carmelo Anthony era and into the Porzingis one. Kanter and McDermott are both solid role players that fit well alongside Porzingis. Kanter has the big body to guard bigger centers and loves to grab rebounds, which is the one area that Porzingis has really struggled with. Whilst Dougie McBuckets is an incredibly smart player who is a fantastic spot-up shooter off the bench, who has been great at hitting KP in the post, making smart cuts, and getting into good positions to knock down open threes. And these two players embody the team that surrounds Porzingis in his third season with the Knicks. A team of role players whose skill set fits KP's, and are mainly focused on getting him the ball to set him and the team up for success. And Porzingis has simply thrived as a result, averaging 24.5 points, 6.6 rebounds, and 2 blocks a game. But this success has been with up and downs, with the young 22-year-old still struggling in some games to get a shot and deal with double teams. This has resulted in games where he goes without a field goal, such as against Boston recently, as well as games with high amounts of turnovers and bad shots. But these games are becoming further and further apart, and the more common occurrence this season has been a dominant two-way performance from the Unicorn. Over the first 25 games he's played this season, KP has notched 30 or more points 10 times, and had his career best performance in an early game against the Indiana Pacers. Here he managed to score 40 points on just 24 shots, grabbed 8 rebounds, and swatted an incredible 6 shots in just one game. Then, against the Lakers, he had 37 points, 11 rebounds, and 5 blocks. These kinds of games show the incredible potential that Porzingis has, and at 22 he still has plenty of room to improve, become more consistent, and even more dominant on both ends of the floor. But can he become the greatest Knick ever? In order to determine if this is even possible, we must determine the bar, by looking at the greatest Knick ever, Patrick Ewing. Whilst Walt Frazier and Willis Reed would round out my top 3 Knicks of all time, Patrick Ewing's career with the Knicks is simply incredible, despite not winning a championship. He played for the Knicks for an astounding 15 seasons, and is the only player to ever play 1,000 games in a New York Knicks uniform. For the Knicks, he would average 22.8 points, 10.4 rebounds, and 2.7 blocks, plus a steal per game over the course of his entire career. These are simply incredible numbers, but at his peak, Ewing averaged 28.6 points, 11 rebounds, 4 blocks, and 1 steal per game on 55% field goal shooting, and was one of the most dominant players of his time. Ewing made the Eastern Conference Finals 4 times in his career, and the NBA Finals twice, but his championship runs were thwarted by Michael Jordan and the Bulls, and the San Antonio Spurs and Tim Duncan. And despite being an incredible player on the defensive and offensive end of the court, Ewing cannot be viewed as a champion of the NBA or an impossible to remove king of New York. If Kristaps can lead the Knicks to a championship or even multiple championships, then he would thrust his name into contention for the greatest Knick of all time. But this is also contingent on him spending a large portion of his career, think 10 years plus, with the franchise, and achieving the same level of play that he has achieved this season. For it to be clear-cut, he would also need to elevate his game even higher for a few years and thrust himself into the MVP contention. So the bar is clear. KP must become one of the best players in the league, stay with the Knicks, and potentially lead them to an NBA championship in order to dethrone Patrick Ewing. But can he do it? First things first, nothing in the NBA is guaranteed, and any predictions made in this next section could be wildly wrong in 4 years, but the potential is definitely there. There simply aren't that many players in league history with the skill set and size that Porzingis has, and he is only just beginning to figure out how exactly to use that to dominate the league. With every game that he plays, every defensive coverage and double team he sees, he'll become more skilled at dealing with them, and this is the only real thing that bothers KP anymore. One-on-one coverage isn't enough to stop a guy who can simply shoot over even the tallest opposition defenders, and he has developed baseline fadeaway shots to allow himself to score late in the shot clock and over anybody. But when teams throw double teams to Kristaps, he still struggles somewhat at reading the coverage and finding the right player to pass to, and when to time his move or pass against the double team. But this is one of the hardest things to get right in the NBA, and we have seen Joel Embiid struggling against it as well this season. But I have full faith in Porzingis to develop this ability and vision, and when he does, he'll become impossible to stop. Because if you double him and Porzingis knows when to hit a cutter or when to kick it out for 3, then doubling him will become just as bad as allowing him to go one-on-one. And that is when you have a truly unstoppable offensive player in the NBA. But no matter how good KP becomes, dethroning Ewing will come almost entirely down to the playoffs. How deep can Porzingis take the Knicks, and how many times can he do it? 4 trips to the Eastern Conference Finals and 2 to the NBA Finals is a big ask for any player, but one championship would trump them all. To do this, he'll need solid teammates around him, as one great player cannot always drag a team to a championship. Frank Ntilikina is a fantastic prospect at the point guard position, and my earlier video on him covers just how well he suits playing next to Porzingis. But the Knicks will be hoping to add one more high upside player to grow alongside their 2 international talents. Most of this will have to wait until Noah and Kanter's contracts come off the books, but in the meantime, they can try and acquire more draft picks and young players on cheap, longer term contracts. If the Knicks can build a roster of smart, team players who can shoot threes, limit turnovers, and play defense, then they'll have a chance of making waves in the post-LeBron era of the NBA, and KP will have his shot at being the greatest Knick of all time. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, be sure to like and subscribe for more NBA videos in the future. And leave a comment on what you think of Kristaps Porzingis and drop any stories you have of other Knicks legends in the comments below.